Hello, hello, my dispatchers, my listeners. I'm your author, your narrator, your host, Scipio Eruditus. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined once again by Dr. Chuck Baldwin, pastor of Liberty Fellowship. You can find more of his work at chuckbaldwinlive.com and his sermons at libertyfellowshipmt.com. He's located out there in Kalispell, Montana. Beautiful country. Definitely need to make the visit there one of these days. But glad to have you back once again, sir. And particularly during times like these, the subject of Zionism and dispensationalism, and of course, particularly as it relates to the church, is a subject we discuss many times, and we'll be discussing once again, at least tangentially today, because it is quite important to explaining really how America has arrived at the point that it has. So I think before we get into some of the subject matter that I wanted to discuss today, just again, introduce yourself to the audience, and then really, if I could just ask you a question, it's where do you think America is going to go from here?
Well, first of all, thank you for letting me come back on your show. Appreciate all the work that you're doing and the word you're putting out. Very important right now, and voices like ours are thankfully growing, actually, but are still very much needed. And so, thank you for what you're doing. Where are we going? You know, uh, 5 or 6 weeks ago, I would have said that we are headed for a serious collapse as a nation because of the collapse of truth within the evangelical church and the lack of new covenant teaching and understanding. Most Christians don't even understand the new covenant, much less teach it. I was, I'm not a pessimist by nature. I tend to be a realist. I try to look at things as they are, not as I wish they would be, or not with a negative doom and gloom outlook. So I try to be realistic, but at the same time, I tend to be skip tip on the optimistic scale just a little bit more than I do the pessimistic scale by nature. But I was not optimistic at all a few months ago about what was happening, mainly because of the deterioration of the church, the sycophantic relationship that they have with Donald Trump, the utter lawlessness of the Trump administration and the US Congress, and the approbation of that lawlessness among evangelicals and amongst people that call themselves conservatives. So it was hard not to be pessimistic. And then along came the war with Iran. And of course, this is the most egregious act of lawlessness to take place by the United States in our lifetime. I mean, we have to go back to early mid 20th century European history to compare the kind of lawless act of aggression that Trump committed against the state of Iran. No declaration of war from Congress, no discussion, no debate in Congress, no input from the American people, no constitutional authority whatsoever, just on his own whim. And I really think that's what it was. I think it was a whim. I think Donald Trump had no plan. He thought this would be like Venezuela, you know, in and out, 1 day operation, boom, it's over, decapitate the presidency and move on. Life is good. He really was clueless, and I think a lot of the robotic Zionist acolytes in his administration were likewise clueless because they were not willing to objectively assess the facts of what would happen if they attacked Iran. And so what happened was what they were not expecting to happen. And but it was very predictable by everyone who understood what Iran was and what they had and what the people and the technology and the way they have grown scientifically, mathematically, industrially. Uh, they have eclipsed in many ways the Western world in military technology. But all of that was apparently dismissed. So we attack Iran. We take out the supreme leader in an act of murder, in an act of aggression. Iran posed zero imminent threat to the United States. This was a war for Israel, no question about it. Trump and Hegseth have told us that. It's a war for Israel. And then 5 minutes later, they dropped two ballistic missiles on a grade school, girls' school, uh, ages 6 to 12, incinerated 275 little children. We have not, as a nation, committed an act of war crime of this nature since My Lai in Vietnam. I forget the year that was, 65 maybe. I could be wrong. But you have to go back that far to replicate the size of the war crime that we committed in Iran against that girls' school. And we did so on purpose, and we could spend a long time on that, but there's no doubt in my mind that we knew it was a girls' school. We've known it since 2016. Our intelligence has known for 10 years. This was not a military target. This was a girls' school. But here's the thing that maybe some people don't realize is that this school was a private school that catered to the officer corps of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. And I don't think that was a coincidence. I think Hegseth and all his hubris and arrogance was sending a message to Iran that we can kill your children if we want to. And the way they did it by dropping two ballistic missiles on the school makes it reprehensible. It's hard for me to really talk about this because the first bomb came in and did damage, but the majority of the little girls and staff were not killed. They rushed them all over to the prayer room part of the building, called parents because they didn't know what was going on. As far as they knew, this could be a terrorist attack from inside Iran. There's all kinds of things that go on in that part of the world.
Sure.
They didn't know at that point they were under attack by the United States. So they're calling parents, come and get your children. There's something bad going on. Parents are showing up to pick up their children. You've got this ballistic missile, circling around the target with cameras on it, taking live photographs on the ground or video on the ground of what's happening. And then Hegseth makes the call to strike it again. And when it struck the second time, and I'm not a military guy and I can't explain this like they can, but I've listened to them explain it in depth. And apparently there's a way that they can explode the unused fuel in the ballistic missile when it lands. And so that's what they did with the second missile. As it came into the building, it ignited the unused fuel of the missile and was just a ball of fire at that point, incinerating anything and everything around it. So those little girls, they were not just killed, they were incinerated. There was nothing left but little charred bodies. So that 1-2 punch ignited a resolve in Iran that apparently we had no idea that would happen. And so, well, now we see what's happening. Uh, the Gulf bases are destroyed. Our troops that were stationed in those bases are now living in hotels around the area. They're not even in the bases. Bases are uninhabitable, unusable. Israel is getting shellacked like never in its history. Of course, there's a blackout of news. Israel is really, really good at censoring news coming out of Israel. So it's hard for us to know the extent of the damage, but suffice it to say that what we do know and what we can conclude by what we know, Israel is on the verge of extinction. It's on the verge of total collapse. We can talk about that if you want to go that way. But the point is that this thing has. Here's what I believe. I believe that this is a history-changing moment. I told my people on Sunday that we are living at a turning point in world history. I mean, there's always changes in the patterns of history, subtle changes all the time. But maybe once in a generation, there's an event that takes place that literally changes the course of the world forever. And when you wake up after that event is over, the world you lived in was gone forever. And you're in a new world. And I believe that's where we are. I believe that we are living in a history-changing moment that will change the course of the world and the makeup and appearance of the world forever. The world that we knew before we launched that war of aggression on Iran is gone, and it will never come back. And there's going to be some really, really uh, periods of suffering and loss and heartache and grief. I think there's going to be pain. But I believe on the other side of that, there's going to be something really, really good take place. I'm optimistic. And I guess I'm optimistic because I don't believe that God is totally finished with the United States. There are still a lot of truly saved people in this country. The salt of the earth are the true Christians who are disciples of Jesus. And I'm not talking about the professing Christians, the fake Christians, which probably are the majority. But I'm talking about the real, genuine people of God. There's still millions of us in this country. And I believe God is still honoring our founding fathers and the principles on which America was built, the history of this country and God's plan for this country. And I'm just not ready to believe that America is finished as far as God's plan is concerned. If my presupposition is correct, I think there's still things that God wants to accomplish in and through us and in and through other parts of the world. The work of God is not confined to one country. So this idea that Christian nationalism, we're the repository of Christianity. We're the repository of God's work, etc. That's nonsense. In fact, right now there are more Muslim people being brought to Christ than in any other part of the world. It is amazing how many Muslim people are coming to Christ. It's really incredible. It's something we never hear about, but it's still a fact nonetheless. So I think there's a lot of things that are going to be coming toward the end of this cataclysmic event because it's not over yet.
Oh no.
And it could get a lot worse. But I just have a spirit of optimism about me that, like Joseph said when he was sold into slavery by his own brothers, and he winds up being the vice regent of Egypt. and the famine and all that. Everybody knows the story. So his brothers come to Egypt, and they're all saved through Joseph, and the brothers are repentant and fearful that Joseph is going to take a vendetta against them because of how they treated him. He didn't, and then he said to them, "Quote: You intended it for evil, but God meant it for good." And I think that there's a lot of evil that's going on right now that God is going to use for good. So, in a general sense, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, no, you've touched on a lot of things I've been pondering lately myself as well, right? I always am trying to, temper my perspective here. For so long, Christendom and the West been synonymous. And certainly no one can look back at the last 2,000 years and not see the major role that Europe and, Western civilization as a whole has played in spreading the gospel across the world. And yet, much like ancient Israel, that's not, something we can just take for granted. And if we think as Americans that we can just kind of sit on our laurels and, oh, hey, this is, in many ways, you can't blame the Puritans for getting here and identifying with Israel so strongly. You look at so many of the natural benefits and strategic and military benefits, to dwelling on this continent here. It is truly the land of plenty in many ways. And so, yeah, my hope, my prayer has been it's stunning what has been unveiled here the past several months between all these Epstein revelations, which we're going to get into. And of course, right, we've had multiple politicians explicitly admit that we started this war because Israel dragged us into it in so many words. I never would have, in my wildest dreams, would have imagined some of these things would be occurring. So on one hand, I'm certainly hopeful. But on the other hand, I still worry, right, that we have the proper response to some of these things, And as you were detailing in the intro there, right, this horrific attack on this girls' school in Iran, it is, I can tell, just from as a former military man, Air Force man, I've been involved in dropping, in kinetic operations, as they say, right? This is, you don't just drop two bombs on any location without knowing what is going on here, without having eyes on. And I'm telling you, the kind of gear and equipment we have, I mean, you can see very clearly in detail tens of thousands of feet up in the air. And you know what is going on. I mean, you talk about like the eye in the sky. I mean, that stuff is real. So the idea that they had no idea what was going on and the fact that there was a double tap, right? I mean, just totally, the DOD's already admitted that this was, our bomb. And the fact that it was a double tap as well is a very well known, very well practiced Israeli strategy in Gaza, where
Right.
they would hit the target one time. And then when aid workers and others, I mean, this just happened, last week in Lebanon, right? A Catholic priest, well known Catholic priest in the area, a building was hit, and him and other aid workers go rushing into this building, and then Israel strikes again, just like America struck again, right? And murders, that's when the most amount of death occurs, actually, right? And after the building's already been destroyed, so there's really little to no defense at this point. It is very evil, very barbaric. And so I think when we look at what's been unfolding here, and I share your assessment really at the the turning point we're at here in many ways. I look back at how we got here, and it really is quite uh, a novel paradigm in many ways, and particularly in the right wing, that we would just support Israel, the nation of Israel. That is very important to distinguish that, because that word has many meanings. I know some people might disagree, but this is immediately evident from the scriptures, right? I mean, this is it's a nation, it's a man, it's typified in Christ, right? So just very evident. But the political entity of Israel, as far as Christians and even conservatives, right wingers, Republicans, what have you, supporting this nation, a very modern innovation. It's really only in the last generation and since the rise of the moral majority that this has become really a dogma on the right wing. For so many years, if you question Israel, you could not have. I mean, you would not be published in any kind of conservative media. You would not certainly be not be going to any of the the speaking circuits or what have you. Definitely not going on Fox News. And it's only in the past couple of years that this has started to shift a little bit here. And I know, you have you were on the ground level as this was really unfolding. And so, one of the reasons I want to bring you on today, sir, is so you could kind of just kind of go through that history, right, and explain how the right wing and how the GOP was captured by Christian Zionism.
That's a great question. And you're looking at a guy that was there when it happened. Um, in the providence of God, I had, well, I was attending another Bible college, and then the Lord led us to, and I got married after my sophomore year, and the Lord led us to transfer to Liberty, what is now Liberty University. At that time, it was Lynchburg Baptist College. Um, when I graduated in 1975, I was in the first full graduating class. In other words, the first 4-year graduating class. And the school was very small. All of the campus that is now Liberty University on Liberty Mountain was non-existent. When I was there, there was just some of the few foundational parts of a few of the buildings that were being laid. That there was nothing there. Students were housed all over Lynchburg. We had different meeting places in different residential areas. Wherever they could find a place to live or a place to meet, it was a very rudimentary beginning that was very humble. And I was privileged to be there at that time. And I say privileged because I got to know Jerry and the people around him at a very close personal level. He took a very strong interest in the preacher boys of the school because, like I said, it was very small. There were very few of us. We were the first. And he took us under his wing and just really was able to spend more time. Then later, when the school got big, it was impossible to have that kind of a relationship.
Sure.
So when I graduated, he came and spoke at my church several times. I spoke at Thomas Road. I spoke on the Old Time Gospel Hour television program. He wrote me up in the Liberty Journal, and I flew on his jet to meetings several times. Was with him in different conferences. Went overseas with him at least twice, maybe 3 times. So it was. We spoke on the phone on a semi-regular basis. It was. It put me in a very unique position because I was already in that circle before it became a circle. Because that didn't happen until 1979 was when the moral majority was formed. And I wasn't one of the ones who formed the moral majority because I was too young. I was one of the young bucks in the room. I mean, the patriarchs of the movement, they were the ones that started it, and they were the ones that were the leaders of it. But I was there. I became a leader. He asked me to become the executive director of the Florida Moral Majority, which I was from 1979 to 1989. And so during that time, I was able to witness firsthand from the inside. I mean, I was there in the room with these guys. I was there in the planning sessions, and the biggest thing that I remember in the beginning of the movement was in 1980 when Of course, everybody was rallying around Ronald Reagan, which was very understandable. You were, coming off the days of Bill Clinton, and um, you know, the country, the evangelical country was shocked that a man like Bill Clinton could become president. That was unthought of at the time. I mean, this just the blatant immorality of Clinton and all of that shocked the evangelical pastors and Christians. So I think it's a normal reaction. You want a change in government. You want someone to represent the things that are good and decent and wholesome and all that. Ronald Reagan was. I met him, had dinner, and he was very amiable, very personable, very friendly, very kind-hearted, very compassionate man, easy to like. Um, so all that was just kind of okay, maybe a natural reaction to what's happening in your country. Okay. But the thing that became obvious as the momentum began to build in the moral majority, and let me tell you, it built fast and it built big. Um, I I could tell you story after story, but when we talk about the moral majority, we look back on that day, and now most people don't even know what it was. They don't even know what it entailed, what it did, what it meant. But I can tell you at that time, from 1979, 1980, the early 80s following the election of Reagan the first time, the moral majority was the most powerful political movement in the United States of America, bar none. There was nothing that came close. It had supplanted all of the previous ensconced, established organizations that kind of had their fingers of control in Washington, D.C. Um, it really was phenomenal how quickly and how far reaching the influence of moral majority became inside the Beltway, not to mention around, America itself, but inside the Beltway. Trust me, it was a huge um, changing of the guard politically inside the Beltway. So, everybody was excited about that because, oh, wow, this is a change for good, and we're turning the country around and blah, blah, blah. And I was excited. I was young. I was less than 30 years old. And of course, I believed everything I was told at that point. And so very naive about a lot of things. For example, I never heard the word Zionist, even though I was trained in what we now know as Christian Zionist theology, but it wasn't called that in those days. It was simply referred to as premillennial dispensationalism. And that's still what they will call it when they're talking theologically. They don't like to use the word Christian Zionist, although it's become much more adaptable inside evangelicalism over the last 10 years or so. But for a long time, they didn't want to use that word. But now they don't mind. It's, they use it all the time. But what when I was young and I went to school and never even heard the term Zionist. The first time I heard it, I was in a press conference with Jerry in Washington, D.C., and there were several leaders of the moral majority, I can name them, but I won't, who were sitting at a table, and the International Press Corps was there. And everything moral majority was hot news. And so all these guys were in constant demand for press conferences. So they were up there at the table. The rest of us were in the audience. So there were, I don't know, several hundreds of pastors that were there in the audience. I was one of them. And then the leaders were at the table. And I remember during the course of the Q&A that one female reporter, I have no idea now which network she represented, but she asked a very straightforward and simple question. And she directed it to Jerry. She said, "This is for Dr. Falwell." And she said, please tell me in, yes or no, are you a Zionist?" And that was the first time I ever heard the word. And I'm sitting in the audience, a young kid, who's now in the middle of this phenomenal national movement inside our nation's capital. I'm rubbing shoulders with congressmen, senators, presidents, vice presidents. I met Pat Buchanan for the first time at that point. He later came to my church and spoke. And anyway, and so I'm sitting there, and I heard the question, and I said, what is a Zionist? I didn't know what it was, but it's amazing because the first thing that came to my mind, you know how your mind thinks faster than your mouth can speak the words. And I remember thinking in my mind, I didn't know what it was, but I remember thinking in my mind, no, we're not Zionists. And I don't even know why I said that, because I didn't know what it was. But whatever it was, I had an instinct that it wasn't good. So I remember saying in my mind, no, we're not that. And no sooner had I thought that in my mind, than I heard Jerry say, and he had a very, very demanding, commanding, powerful bass voice. He could sing bass in a quartet. He was a great bass. Um, in his booming bass voice, he said, "Yes." He answered it in one word. Yes. And when he said yes, it stunned me because it wasn't what I was expecting, even though I didn't understand it. So I said to myself, well, I don't really know what this is. So if he's for it, it's got to be good. And so I just dismissed it. Okay. So that was the first time that ever came up as an issue in those early days of my tenure there. Later on, I found out that the jet that I flew on with Jerry, which was owned by Jerry or by his ministry, was donated by Israel.
Prime Minister.
Pardon?
It was by the Prime Minister.
Yes, it was. And I began to learn about the connection with Israel more and more as time went on. But the point is that I'll just say this. In the very beginning, I would say the vast majority of the pastors that became the grassroots pastors, now I'm not talking about the guys at the top, the
Mm-hmm.
grassroots pastors, most of them were good-hearted, sincere, God-fearing men who truly wanted to do something good for the country. I really believe that. Um, I don't think they were conspiratorial. I don't think they were Zionist. I don't think they were. I think most of them were like me. They didn't even know what Zionism was. It was not an issue that was ever broached in our education, in our pastoral circles, conferences, meetings, private, public. It never came up. It wasn't. It was not an issue. But at the leadership level, that wasn't the case. Uh, I came to learn later that there was an agenda from the beginning, and some of it was good, and some of it was not good. The biggest negative, looking back, and while I was there, that I saw was in the debate for who would be Ronald Reagan's running mate. This was a huge battle inside the Republican Party at that time. There was no question that Ronald Reagan would be the presidential nominee. That was never in doubt. The only question was who was going to be his running mate. And Reagan, he genuinely felt in his heart an affinity for Jerry. Jerry and Ron became very, very close friends personally. And Ron wanted Jerry's approbation and support for his major decisions. At that time, the major decision was who's going to be my vice president. So so he came to us. By us, I mean the pastors that comprised the moral majority leadership. Ronald Reagan, came to us and said, I want you guys to help me with this decision. So, oh wow, the next president of the United States is asking us who we want. Well, so immediately there was, as you can imagine, there was a lot of relational. I could use the word politicking. I'm not sure that's the right word, but
sure, haggling and whatnot.
Haggling and discussion and weighing of candidates. And I mean, all of a sudden we became experts at who these guys were, and we started examining everything about their past, and it was an in-depth. I can tell you, it was not a cursory, rudimentary kind of thing. We took it very seriously. Bottom line was, after the initial, kind of scatterbrained approach to what we're doing here, it came down to two names. And the one name was George H.W. Bush, and the other name was Jesse Helms. And he was senator from North Carolina, staunch anti-communist and conservative. I've met Jesse several times, and he was a remarkable man in many ways. God spared his life. He was supposed to be on KAL 007 whenever the Koreans shot it down, but they thought he was going to be on that flight along with Senator Sims, who was on the flight, and from Georgia. He was the head of the John Birch Society.
No, I know who you're talking about.
He's
I'm
a
blanking
staunch
on his
conservative.
name. Yeah,
He was a Democrat. He
yeah.
was on the plane. So they thought they were getting two senators and the most anti-communist congressman in the House in one shot. The
Hmm.
last minute, Jesse had a change of plans, and he caught another flight, and he was in Anchorage waiting for his plane. Whenever the rest of the people got on KAL 007, he's saw him leave, and they were shot down and killed. But Jesse was spared because he took another flight. Anyway, so I was part of the quote unquote conservative group that was really pushing for Jesse.
Larry McDonald,
Larry
Congressman Larry
McDonald.
McDonald.
Thank you very much. Larry
Yep.
McDonald. Yeah,
I had
great
to look
man.
that up. It was, yeah, no, I've written about him before. No, yeah, very strange circumstances,
Yeah.
that whole
No,
shoot
yeah,
down
he was
there.
murdered, no doubt about it. He was murdered,
I'm
and
certainly of that opinion.
uh, I met him on two or three occasions, and he was terrific. He was a Democrat, and
Yep.
he would make, except for Thomas Massey and Rand Paul, he'd make all the Republicans today look like Democrats.
Honestly, yeah.
Honestly,
It shows you how much has changed in the last 40
yeah,
years.
yeah. Republican means nothing anymore. But so the push for Bush really stunned me because we all knew who he was. This was not an unknown character to us. I mean, we knew all about his family history. We knew about the association with JFK, and we knew about, you know, the drug running and all the stuff that came out, years later. But that was known to most of us anyway. And we were aghast that he would even be considered. Well, then, long story short, there was an impasse, and our side was not surrendering. And then finally, Jerry came out and addressed all of us at one time, and he made the case for G.W. Bush. And after he did that, I mean, this was the man that was the most influential leader of the moral majority. And after he did that, the vast majority of us went with Bush. I never did. I was one of the radical holdouts.
That's not too surprising
No
then.
way. You know? But at that point, we were a very small minority and it didn't matter.
Sure.
So, you know, that's how Bush became the vice president of Ronald Reagan. And at that point, that began you know, my questioning of what's really going on. And then I could go on and on with story after story. I won't. It takes too long. But I finally realized that really, I don't know whether it was ever the intention or not from the beginning. I don't think I'm in a position to say. It doesn't matter because the outcome was a marriage took place between the Christian right and the Republican Party. No doubt in my mind. Before that, no, that was not the case. Christian men, pastors, were not married to a political party. They preached principles, they preached doctrines, they preached ethics, right and wrong, good and evil. You need to choose good and not evil. And they didn't try to politicize good and evil. They just preached it like they saw it, and it fell wherever it fell. And if it offended a Republican, too bad. If it offended a Democrat, too bad. That's the way, believe it or not, that's the way most of your fundamentalist / evangelical pastors were back in the pre. Uh, I'll go back, say, especially 60s, early 70s. There was they were really truth-oriented men, most of them. Now we could talk about the church growth movement, but that's another story. So, but after Reagan won, and by the way, he didn't need George W. Bush. I mean, the whole idea was, well, the moderates are not going to vote for Reagan because he's too conservative, so we got to get the moderates. And the whole political rationale, that was the reason given. But truth of the matter was, Ronald Reagan would have won if he had Donald Duck as his vice president. I mean, he didn't need Bush. Bush was put in place so that he might be a president and the major influencer of the Republican Party post Reagan, and which he did, and literally changed the course of the Republican Party forever. But what happened was, at that point in time, good equaled Republican, bad equaled Democrat. And this unholy marriage between the religious right and a political party, Republican Party, was till death do us part. It really was that serious. It was that real. I saw it. From that point forward until this very day, the religious right is married to the Republican Party. And it doesn't matter who the Republican Party puts up. Just like they swallowed G.H.W. Bush under Reagan, but he was number two guy. But now they will accept anybody. I mean, they accept Mitt Romney back in 2008. They accepted G.W. Bush. Of course, he went out, and said, "I'm a born again Christian" and all that. But then he turns around and invades two countries and gets us into and they were fine with it. The Patriot Act, which, by the way, the people, Scipio, you might want to be interested in this. The Patriot Act, what now we know it's the Patriot Act, was actually introduced the first time under Bill Clinton.
Yep, by Joe Biden, I believe.
Bill Clinton. Yeah, Bill Clinton first. Bill Clinton was the first one to introduce.
Well, Joe Biden was the one who put it forward.
Oh yeah, who as a senator. Yeah, it was correct. He was one of the supporters of it within the Senate. Right. But it was introduced by Bill Clinton. And it was rejected in the Congress because the Republicans, all of them, would not support it. The same exact bill, the same wording. They didn't do anything to it except change the name and the date. Was introduced under G.W. Bush, and the Republicans all supported it. And it's now the law, been the law since, 2001, 2, whatever it was. So what that shows you is these guys are not about principles. They're not about right and wrong. I mean, if the Patriot Act was wrong in the late 1990s under Clinton, then it was still wrong in 2000 under Bush. So that they rejected it. Oh, they got up. Oh, this is bad. This is tyranny. This is un-American. We can't have that. It's against the Constitution. And then a few years later, because you've got a Republican in the White House, it's righteous. It's holy. It's good. It's of God. It's and they got the preachers promoting it in the pulpits. So that was it. That was it. From then till now, there has been this inseparable union between the Republican Party and the Christian right. So no matter what the Republican Party does, the Christian right is going to support it. No matter how unconstitutional, how evil, it doesn't matter. If the Republicans are doing it, they're for it. That was the net result of the moral majority. I hate to say it, but that was the net result. Whatever the intentions were in the beginning, that was the net result. And so ever since then, we have had a politicized American evangelical clergy. They're totally politicized. They either will say nothing when a Republican's in office, or they will support what the Republican does. But they'll never criticize. They'll never bring opposition to the table. So the result of that is perpetual war for Israel. Because the Netanyahu and Menachem Begin and Golda Meir and all these corrupt Zionist leaders, they understood that the evangelical Christian world were the most susceptible to their propaganda. would be the easiest ones to win over to the Zionist cause. They recognized that back in the 60s. And they began working on the Republican Party. And behind the scenes, they were always there. So when all this started, AIPAC was an insignificant lobby group. Now it's the most important lobby group in the United States Congress, along with the rest of the Israeli lobbies. So from the beginning, this has been intertwined with the support for Israel. So, you've asked me a question that would take me 2 or 3 hours to answer it, but that's the best I can do in a short period of time.
No, certainly. I think, you made an important distinction. Whether Jerry Falwell and some of these other figures initially associated with it, whether this was always their intention is really irrelevant because it's not even disputable at this point that Israel, starting in 1982 under Begin, with the Oded Yanan plan, starts, imagining and starts preparing for greater Israel and the expansion of their borders. And so the number one step in realizing that plan was destabilizing all these Arab and neighboring regimes in the region. And so you see, yeah, at one point, right, the prime minister of Israel buys a private jet for Jerry Falwell, and is, has all expenses paid trips for him and these pastors and other political leaders. I mean, they're doing that with our Congress critters now as well. I mean, it's absolutely stunning stuff, frankly. And you mentioned AIPAC earlier, and one of the pushback I know a lot of these Hasbro shills will always give, right, is AIPAC doesn't donate that much. They're only like 100, I think like the 100th largest political donor or something. Well, excuse me, it's not just AIPAC, right? There's a network of Israeli and Zionist lobbyists that all work together in concert. So, it's not just AIPAC by itself, it's AIPAC and, an umbrella of different organizations.
Right.
And, we look back at really this hijacking of the Republican Party and so many of our politicians to this ideology. And as the Epstein files have been, unveiling and continuing to unveil, I mean, there's still millions of files that were owed that the DOJ admits to. I mean, truly, the Lord only knows what they're keeping under lock and key still. I mean, what's been revealed is horrific enough. I mean,
Yes.
all the most craziest theories I could have told you, 10 years ago when Epstein, a lot of this stuff really started getting on the radar again. Almost all of them been vindicated. I've been stunned watching what's been unfolding here the past couple months. And so I know we spoke last time. Did you ever see any hints of that while you were in Washington?
The Epstein? No, no,
Yes, sir.
no. There was no hint of awareness of that among the religious right Christian coalition, moral majority, call them whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
No, there was no mention of that. It wasn't on the radar. Um, this thing about the Israeli lobby, I brought a message and I went through the list of the various Israel lobbies that are operating inside the Beltway, and there's scores of them, not just eight or 10. There's scores of them, and they all bring millions and millions of dollars to the table, collectively billions of dollars. AIPAC brags, and you can go to their website and read this information. They brag about all of the congressmen, Democrat and Republican, that they either elect because they're pro-Israel or they defeat because they're not pro-Israel enough. um, you know, it, well, there's so much. You got my mind bringing back so many things. Every Congress, I got to know a Democrat congressman fairly well, and we wouldn't agree on much of anything except we agreed on the freedom of speech and we agreed on anti-Zionism. Most everything else we didn't agree, but on those two issues we were very much in agreement. And I remember meeting with her, and her name is slipping my mind, and I guess I'm getting old, but she told me in person, then later I heard her say it in public, that her first day after being elected to the House of Representatives, a representative from AIPAC walked into her office. First day that she's on the job.
Cynthia McKinney?
Cynthia McKinney, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And introduced himself, gave her a form, asked her to sign it. She read it, and the form was basically, I agree to always support legislation that is good for Israel, and I promise, pledge, whatever, to not support any legislation that is not good for Israel. That's paraphrasing, but that's the gist of it.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, loyalty pledge.
Exactly. And of course, she tore it up and told the guy to politely leave his office. And she said that every congressman that goes to Washington has to sign that or face the wrath of the lobby. Thomas Massey has said that every congressman has an AIPAC babysitter. That's the word that he used. That yet every congressman has a watchdog for that one congressman or senator, watching every vote, watching every piece of legislation, watching everything they do, reporting back to the lobby, good or bad, making assessments. Do we support? Do we not support? And that they have intimidated and blackmailed basically the entire Congress, with the exception of just a handful. So that's where we are now. And the Epstein issue, boy, I tell you, I really believe that much of this war is about keeping the Epstein files hidden. I think there's other things that work too,
Oh,
but
certainly.
I do believe that the Epstein files are part of it. And what you said about the vileness and wickedness contained, it just the parts I've read, the accusations made by the little girls, is enough to bring out righteous indignation within anybody who has any sense of decency. I mean, you don't have to be a Christian to understand the grotesqueness of what's in those files, the evil of it. And the Epstein class, the billionaires that form the Epstein class, are saturated with Zionists. The Epstein web was created by Zionists in Tel Aviv. It's a Mossad operation. I don't think there's any question of that. Epstein was a master at what he did. And he collected through photographs and video and spoken words and recordings, text messages, emails, and he saved everything. Everything was sent to Israel. Everything was used to blackmail these people in power, not just political power, but economic power in the business world, in the industrial world. And so now that people are starting to become familiar with it and they're angry over it, and people are angry over it, and the vast majority of the American people are aware of it, and they are not going to let it go into oblivion. They're not going to forget it. So I don't think it's going to ever go away. I think at some point this is going to come out. I mean, the unredacted parts are going to come out. I think at some point America is going to see what's in the Epstein files. And I think there will be hell to pay by a lot of people. And how soon that's going to happen and how extensively that's going to happen, your guess is as good as mine. But I am convinced it will happen. But this war is helping to keep both Trump and Netanyahu in power. I mean, Netanyahu goes to prison if he's not fighting a war. And we already have Trump talking about canceling the midterm elections, declaring a state of emergency, martial law.
Has he actually come out and said that? Yeah,
Yeah.
unsurprising.
Well, I don't know if he's used the word martial law yet, but
Sure, but
he has used the word state of emergency, and he's used the idea of canceling midterm elections because of the war in Iran. So he's already floating that idea out there. So we know that's where he's going to be going with it. And all of this is to save their own skin. I mean, they have invested the lives of the American people, the economic stability of the entire world, not to mention
truly,
the blood and sacrifice and the lives of American service personnel and hundreds of thousands of civilians, just to keep their power and influence in their two respective positions. I don't think God is going to let it succeed. I really don't. I believe there are limits. I think I'm historically and biblically correct
I would
when I
agree.
say that God has his own red line,
Yeah,
that he does not allow evil and wickedness to go on perpetually forever. He doesn't. He is still a God of justice. And I do believe that justice is going to come out in some of these things in the near future. And so that's why I have a little bit of optimism here about what's happening in Iran. Like I said, there's going to be pain in the meantime, but I do believe this is going to change the world. And I believe that a lot of these people that have amassed so much power over not just the American government, but literally the governments of the world. When you stop and think about it, is there another? Yeah, there's two countries that I can think of that are not submissive to the Central Reserve Bank, Federal Reserve Bank. One is Iran, and the other is Cuba. And they're talking about taking over both of them. I kind of agree with Smedley Butler, the Marine Corps general back in World War One, who said all wars are bankers' wars.
indeed.
And and I think there's a lot of truth in that. So, I think that there's just going to be some changes. I really do. I think that whatever bad comes, God is shaking the planet. I believe He is shaking the planet. And when the corrupt fruit falls to the ground and gets trampled on, it's going to be a better place to live. That doesn't mean that the devil's finished and there's not something else lurking around the corner to deal with, of course. But I do believe that that what we have faced for the last 75 years, especially since 1967, there is going to be a change made, and I'm optimistic about it.
But I certainly hope so, Pastor. I certainly hope so. You look out at what's been unfolding in America for so long. And lest people think we're speaking out of turn here. I mean, watching what's unfold in Iran really makes me wonder, man, what kind of dirt did Epstein have on Trump, right? Because this would not be the first president that Israel has had sexual blackmail and dirt
No
on.
question.
Bill Clinton Monica Lewinsky was a friend of Jonathan Pollard, the
Hmm.
the double agent and spy that Mike Huckabee went and saw a couple months ago.
Right?
She was friends with Jonathan Pollard,
Yes,
an,
aware of
an
that.
Israeli super spy, and the Israelis blackmailed and used this information against Bill Clinton. So, and I mean, this is all not even conspiracy. I mean, this is mainstream history. You can readily find this information. So really, you really do have to wonder, like, man, what do they have on Trump to get him to do these kinds of things? Because I know you mentioned earlier that you thought it was someone on a whim, but they were streaming in military and continue to, right? Despite the claims that there's a ceasefire coming, and they're still sending tens of thousands of troops into the
Oh
Middle
yeah.
East. So, and they have been this entire time. They're like, oh, the war's going to end soon, and peace is about to break out, and yet tens of thousands of more troops and more aircraft carriers and more bombers and XYZ. It's what I've seen unfolding. I'm not too surprised on many fronts, but what I will say is how powerful the asymmetric warfare on Iran's behalf has been. And really, when you said earlier that Iran has, in some ways, surpassed the West in military technology, I don't think that's hyperbolic. The future of warfare is drone based. And if you do not have things that can fight drones or your own kind of drone swarms, right? What we're seeing is that these drones are a couple $100s, a couple $1,000s to build for some of them. The interceptor missiles to stop them are tens of millions of dollars. That's not sustainable. You
Right.
know, Iran, or excuse me, but Israel's basically run out of interceptors.
Yes, they
So, which
have.
is why, at least for me, kind of looking at this from the outside, is very concerning, and why I'm somewhat very skeptical that we're going to see a breakout of a ceasefire or anything like that. Because if you're Israel, you need ground troops in Iran to, at the very least, distract them, right, and to direct some of that firepower, some other way.
Yeah, because Israel is getting whipped by Hezbollah in Lebanon. Uh,
And the Houthis just joined as
and
well.
the Houthis have just now decided to join in. But in Lebanon, for example, Israel has lost just in the last few weeks over 100 tanks. Now think about that. Israel's a small country. They 100 tanks Hezbollah has destroyed and their crews. And I mean, they are wreaking serious losses on Israel in Lebanon. Hamas is fighting the IDF in Gaza. I mean, after 2.5 years of 5 miles by 25 miles, you've got 2 million people compacted in that little space, and even with that, you talk about a military advantage. You got all the enemy boxed into a little bitty area, and you've got tanks, and you've got everything, and you've got aircraft, and you've got modern technology from the West. And still to this, and now since the war in Iran broke out, Hamas is now even more aggressive in their resistance to Israel in Gaza, and they're inflicting serious damage on the IDF in Gaza still, and that's not being reported. But Israel is in terrible shape. They called up 300,000 troops. Netanyahu called up 300,000 reservists a week or so ago, and 100,000 of them didn't show up. They just said we're not going to fight. Oh, and that's a third. That's a third of the army. It said we're not going to fight. The morale inside the IDF from the sources that I hear is rock bottom. It can't get any worse, and they don't have the manpower to begin with, and the manpower they have is totally demoralized. They're getting beat on every front. They have no troops to send to Iran. Uh, they don't even want any part of Iran. They know that they would get slaughtered. If they're getting slaughtered by Hezbollah in Lebanon and they're getting beat by Hamas in Gaza, what are they going to do against Iran? Nothing except die. So they want the United States to do it. They want us to do the bleeding and the dying. They want us to do the killing on their behalf in Iran. And it looks like that we're going to do it. I mean, I think I think Trump's going to put troops on the ground. I think he will. And I hate to say this. Look, I've got a grandson. I have a blood stake in this. People can criticize me all they want. Say, well, you're just an armchair quarterback and you've got an agenda. Yeah, okay. Say that all you want. I have a grandson who's a lieutenant in the United States Army right now. He was stationed in Fort Bragg. We don't know where he is now. He's not able to tell us where he is. That means he's probably in the Middle East. So I have a grandson, probably in the Middle East, fighting an unjust, unconstitutional, immoral war of aggression against a nation that posed no imminent threat to the United States of America, and we're doing it on behalf of a foreign government, Israel. So people could criticize what I'm saying all they want, but I have a blood stake in what's going on over there. And so do thousands of other families. Okay. And none of them want their boys and girls, their sons and daughters, their husbands and wives, their mothers and fathers dying for a foreign government. None of them. And this thing is you thought Vietnam was unpopular. This is the most unpopular conflict ever in American history by the people of the country I'm talking about. That's not going to stop Trump. It hasn't stopped Netanyahu. It won't stop him. The more we escalate, the worse it becomes for us and the better it becomes for Iran. Every day the war goes on, they get stronger, we get weaker. Why should Iran submit to a ceasefire? I mean, they're winning and they know it. And not only are they winning, they know that they're changing the course of history. That goes back to what I said earlier in the broadcast. This is a historic change of the entire world that we will never be what we were before this war broke out. The world is going to change. And some of it is going to be bad for America, and some of it is going to be good for America. But the point is that look, Iran and Israel are dropping bombs on Tehran. And I'm way over. I got to get to work.
Certainly.
While they're dropping bombs on Tehran, there are hundreds of thousands of protesters, unarmed civilians, marching in the streets of Tehran, victory or death. Bombs are exploding all around them. I've seen the video, maybe you have too. The bombs are exploding all around them. They are en masse, bunched together like ants, hundreds of thousands of them. They don't flinch. They don't move. They shake their fist. What they're saying to us is, you're going to have to kill every one of us to achieve your goal. If you think you're going to feed us, you are delusional. We're not afraid of you. We're not afraid to die. Now, how many people do you know in the United States of America, like I live here in Kalispell, Montana. Let's say that Russia was throwing bombs on Kalispell, Montana, downstream on Main Street. You think there's going to be hundreds of thousands of people marching on Main Street with bombs going off all around them? I don't think so. I don't think you find Americans out marching in any street with bombs exploding all around them. That we'd be finding the lowest basement we could find to get into. Those people are marching out in no Kevlar vests, no helmets, no protection of any kind, street clothes, out in hundreds of thousands. That's what we are dealing with. We are dealing with an Assyrian empire of millennia that have fought war after war after war. Their religion teaches them that martyrdom is the greatest way to go into the afterlife. It's the most rewarding way to go into the afterlife. They're not afraid to die. From childhood, they are taught this. They will die. They were in an Iraq war for what, 10 years? We supplied the Iraqis with all the weapons, including chemical weapons. They killed 300,000 Iranian troops in those 10 years. 300,000. The Iranians did not stop fighting, and they won the war. These people are not afraid to fight. They're not afraid to die. They have the technology to do it. They have scientists that are as smart as any scientists in the world. They have developed an arsenal that is second to none. They are able to exercise warfare at a level that we haven't seen in probably since World War II, as far as parallel level. We've always considered ourselves, the superpower of the world. Now we come up against Iran, and they're fighting a war that we can't even touch. We can't defend. Like you said, our interceptors are gone. We have no defense mechanisms left. The bases are destroyed. Israel is in total disarray, panic, on the verge of dissolution. Colonel Wilkerson is out there predicting that Israel is going to disappear from the face of the earth. That's what Colonel Wilkerson said just a few days ago. I mean, this is one of the most respected military / geopolitical analysts in the world today. And yet, the evangelical churches are supporting Trump and the war. They're the last bastion of idiocy left in America that is still hanging on to this numbskull ideology of Christian Zionism. But I'm telling you, Scipio, their days are numbered. The polls are undeniable. You get under the age of 40, and almost no one supports Israel. Even in the 50s, the polls are really slipping. I mean, you got to get up to the boomer generation to find maybe 50% or more that are still supporting Zionist Israel. You get down under 30, forget it. 20, I mean, the future of America is anti-Zionist. That is unquestioned. That is absolutely unassailable. So even if it doesn't happen within the scope of the war in Iran, the future of American support for Israel is over. It's just a matter of when. But the writing is on the wall. Netanyahu knows it. The lobby knows it. That's why they are working overtime. That's why they are working so hard to take over the media. They took over TikTok, which was a great public forum of free speech. They took that over. They've taken over CBS News. They're taking over CNN. They're doing everything they can to take over the media and the social media to try to take the narrative back to the pro-Israel perspective. They're losing. It's not working. So I think this by itself is an act of God. I think this is an act of intervention by God himself to break America free from the stranglehold of Zionism, especially Christian Zionism. I believe this is of God. I mean, when I first started talking about this, it was in 2014, Scipio. I didn't hear anybody talking about it. And maybe there were, but I didn't hear them. And now
Indeed.
then, Joe Rogan's talking about Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens. I mean, go on down the list. How many podcasters are there out there that are shedding the light on Zionism? And a lot of them are not even Christian. So be it. You don't have to be a Christian to know the truth about Zionism or the truth about morality, the truth about decency, or the truth about constitutionality, and all these other things that are very vital to our national existence. You don't have to be a Christian to know right from wrong. So I believe this is all a work of God. That's why I say I am cautiously optimistic. I believe God is doing something. I believe He's changing the course of America and the course of the world. And even though that there's going to be some pain in the interim, I think at the end, God's will is going to prevail and the purposes of God will prevail. My opinion.
Well, certainly you're going to get a hearty amen from me on that, sir. And if that does end up playing out here, it'll be because of men like you, sir, brave men like you who have stood the line on this issue when it was not popular, when, people weren't all over social media making these kinds of stands. And as, we were talking a little bit before the show, you were very much ensconced within this world. And it was at great personal cost that you came to some of these conclusions, right? The truth over everything else. And so, yeah, I'm deeply appreciative of your work and your continued voice of clarity, particularly as it relates to America's most recent acts of aggression. Uh, yeah, just can't thank you enough, sir, really, for so many of the courageous stands you've taken. And for those who are wanting to catch more of your work, you do a weekly column. For those who are looking to catch up on some of your sermons, I highly recommend the Israel package of sermons and your eschatology package as well on Revelation. Great stuff. But, just again, share the links with the folks and where they can catch some more of your work.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I'm thankful for what you're doing as well, Scipio. Thank you for this time we had together today.
Yeah, so folks can catch you at libertyfellowshipmt.com, Liberty Fellowship MT on YouTube, Chuck Baldwin Live. Again, I mentioned the weekly column. So, yeah, just thank you so much for your time and God bless.
Yep, same to you, Scipio. Thank you.